The candlelight flickered against Aleandro Valenti's face as he sat across from the empty chair where Emma should have been sitting. 7 years old. Dark curls. His daughter in every way except the paperwork he was about to sign. The private booth at La Stella Nera, the restaurant with amber walls and dark wood paneling so thick it swallowed sound itself, had been reserved for an hour. Just the three of them. Him, the child, and Aria Reynolds, the woman he had never truly seen. The trembling started in his hands first. Emma had not arrived. The reservation was for 7:15. It was now 7:51. Marco stood outside the booth, phone pressed to his ear, speaking in rapid Italian to someone at the penthouse. Pietro watched the restaurant entrance like a man studying a crime scene. Neither lieutenant had ever seen Aleandro Valenti wait for anyone. In 15 years of working for him, neither man had witnessed him sit at a table with a child's booster seat already positioned beside his own. Then the kitchen door swung open. Aria Reynolds moved through the restaurant like a ghost, quiet, faithful, invisible. The black and white uniform, the white apron tied perfectly at her waist, the dark hair pulled into a knot so tight it looked painful. She had worked in his mansion for 8 months, cleaning his bedroom twice weekly without ever meeting his eyes, washing his sheets, clearing his coffee cups, existing in the spaces between his moments. He had noticed her once, exactly once, when she dropped a vase in the hallway and stood motionless for 3 minutes, waiting for punishment that never came. Her eyes were red, swollen at the edges like she had been crying in the kitchen. "I am sorry," she said, and her voice trembled like a candle in the wind. "Emma is sick. Very sick. We came to the hospital instead. I know this was important. I know you waited. She was having trouble breathing and I did not know what else to do. I am so sorry." Aleandro rose from the chair with a movement that made both Marco and Pietro flinch. He was 6'1", broad-shouldered, dressed in a charcoal suit that cost more than she had earned in her entire life. His dark hair was swept back from his face, revealing the scar that ran from his left eye to his cheekbone, a reminder of the brother who had tried to kill him when he was 23 years old. "Which hospital?" His voice came out like thunder wrapped in ice. "Mercy General. Room 317. She has been there since 5:30. The doctors say it might be pneumonia or maybe something worse. They would not let me call. I asked and asked but they said I was not family and..." He was already moving. Marco had the car pulled around in 90 seconds. Black SUV, tinted windows, the kind of vehicle that made regular people step off the sidewalk. Aria sat in the back seat beside Aleandro, her uniform still damp from the rain outside, her hands folded so tightly in her lap that her knuckles turned white. She did not speak. She did not look at him. She stared out the window at the Los Angeles street sliding past in the darkness, and he could hear the small sounds of her breathing, shallow, frightened, the breathing of someone waiting for disaster. The hospital corridors smelled like antiseptic and despair. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. A nurse in blue scrubs nearly dropped her clipboard when she saw Aleandro walking toward her with 2 men in dark suits flanking him like bodyguards, which they were, which everyone in this hospital now understood they were. Room 317 was for doors down on the left. Emma lay in the child's hospital bed, hooked to machines that beeped and hissed, her small body swimming in white sheets that seemed designed for adults twice her size. Her lips had a bluish tint. Her breathing came in shallow gasps that lifted her chest and fell again, lifted and fell, like she was learning how to breathe for the first time. Aleandro stood in the doorway without moving. "The doctors say they need to monitor her overnight," Aria whispered. "They are running more tests. They said the pneumonia is advanced but treatable. She will be okay. They said she will be okay." He did not respond. He walked to the bed and looked at Emma's sleeping face. Her dark curls spread across the pillow like a prayer someone had forgotten to finish. He reached down and touched her forehead, a gesture so gentle it seemed impossible that this hand had ever held a gun, ever made a decision that destroyed another person's entire world. "I have no money for this," Aria said. Her voice had dropped to barely a whisper. "The hospital asked for a deposit." I have $78. 78. That is all. Everything else is gone. Everything. The words hung in the fluorescent air between them. Aleandro turned to face her, and for the first time in their 8 months of coexistence in his mansion, he truly looked at her. Not through her. Not past her. At her. And something shifted in his chest, something cold and dangerous that he could not yet name, could not yet understand, could not yet afford to acknowledge, because understanding it would mean changing everything. "What is your daughter's name?" he asked. "Emma." She is not my daughter. Not officially. I have been raising her since she was 2 years old. Her mother abandoned her at the shelter where I was working before I came to clean your house. She was left in a cardboard box with nothing but a pair of tiny shoes. I kept those shoes. I have kept them for 5 years. They are the only thing Emma has from her real mother. Aleandro looked back at the child in the hospital bed. "She is my daughter now," he said. "You will go to the billing office downstairs. You will tell them that all expenses are covered. You will tell them my name. And then you will come back here, and you will sit with her while she sleeps, and you will not worry about money again." Aria's hands began to shake. "I cannot ask you to." "You did not ask." He turned to Marco, who was standing by the window with his phone already in his hand, understanding before the words were spoken that the boss had made a decision that would change everything about how they operated, about what they protected, about who mattered in this carefully constructed empire of violence and loyalty. "Call Dr. Castellano," Aleandro said. "Tell him I want the best pneumonia specialist in the city at this hospital by morning. Tell him cost is irrelevant. And find out who admitted Emma to this place. I want to know why my people did not know she was in danger before she collapsed." Pietro appeared in the doorway with 3 cups of coffee balanced in his hands. He set them down on the small table beside Emma's bed, and his eyes met Marco's for exactly 1 second, a moment of communication that required no words. In 15 years of working for Aleandro Valenti, neither man had ever seen him sit vigil over a sick child. Neither man had ever seen him speak to a maid like she was something other than furniture. The machines beeped and hissed. The hospital lights hummed their endless song. Emma breathed in and breathed out, in and out, each breath a small victory against whatever darkness had invaded her lungs. And outside the window, the November rain fell against the glass like tiny fists trying to break through, trying to warn them that everything they thought they knew about each other was about to change, that secrets had been kept, that none of them understood how the invisible woman in the black and white uniform had already saved Aleandro's life once before, and that when he learned the truth, the entire structure of his empire would shift on its axis like a building in an earthquake. But that was still 3 weeks in the past. That was still waiting to be discovered. That was still locked inside a moment that had not yet revealed itself to any of them. For now, there was only the sound of the machines and the breathing of a sick child and a man who had never waited for anyone sitting beside a woman the world had taught to be invisible, finally seeing her for the very first time. For months before the hospital machines beeped their endless song, before the November rain fell like tiny fists against the glass, before Aria Reynolds understood that the man whose sheets she cleaned twice weekly would become the only force standing between her sister and darkness, she existed in the margins of another person's world. The Valenti mansion sat in the hills above Los Angeles like a fortress made of marble and money. Aria had never asked why she was hired. She had simply shown up at 6 in the morning on a Monday in July, her black and white uniform hanging loose on her frame, her hair pulled back so tightly it gave her a headache. The woman who answered the door, a stern-faced housekeeper named Mrs. Chen, had shown her to a supply closet and pointed at the second floor without making eye contact. That was 5 months ago. In all that time, Mrs. Chen had not asked her name twice. The master bedroom was larger than the entire apartment where Aria lived with her sister Emma. It smelled of expensive cologne, the kind that cost more than a month of her laundry service wages. The walk-in closet held suits arranged by color, charcoal, navy, black, the occasional burgundy that suggested someone who understood power well enough not to need to shout it. Each jacket hung on wooden hangers that probably cost more than her weekly rent. Aria worked in absolute silence. She changed the silk sheets every Monday and Thursday, her hands moving quickly, efficiently, without thought. She had learned long ago that invisibility was easier than being seen. Being seen meant questions. Questions meant explaining things she could not afford to explain. So she moved through the mansion like smoke, like a ghost who had not yet realized she was dead. The bathroom was marble and chrome. A marble countertop held a single coffee cup, always empty, always placed in the exact same spot. She had left it there this morning. She knew because she always did. Beside it, a Rolex watch lay face up, the gold catching the light. She never moved the watch. She dusted around it, careful not to disturb it. Once, when she was new, she had moved a cufflink by mistake. Mrs. Chen had called her into the hallway and told her that some people noticed things. Some people noticed everything. The closet door was open. She did not look at the clothes, did not allow herself to touch anything unnecessary. She cleaned the shower, marble again, everything in this place was marble, as if stone could somehow prevent time from touching anything, and then she retreated, her cart of supplies following behind her like a loyal dog. The hallway stretched forever. Oil paintings hung on the walls, portraits of people she did not recognize. The light came through high windows and fell in strips across the hardwood floor. That was when she heard his voice. It came from the study, the door partially open. His voice, deep and solid like an oath, speaking Italian with the kind of certainty that suggested he had never been interrupted in his life. No. I do not care what he promised. Tell Cordelia that the arrangement is finished. A pause. The sound of papers moving. I said finished. Do not make me repeat myself a third time. The line went dead. Or the call ended. Or whatever happened when a man like that decided a conversation was over. Aria did not slow her pace. She did not turn her head. She rolled her cleaning cart past the study door as though she had not heard anything, as though the voice had not sent a small wire of fear down her spine. She knew what lived in this house. She had seen the men who came at night, the ones in suits who walked through the halls like they owned the earth. She had heard enough conversations in her 5 months here to understand that some people operated outside the law the way other people breathed. Quietly. Naturally. Without thinking. She did not know his name then. She knew him only as the man whose sheet she changed, whose coffee cup she placed in its designated spot, whose life ran parallel to hers without ever intersecting. 3 hours later, Aria stood in the diner on Figueroa Street, her hair still pulled back so tightly it felt like a vice, her feet already aching though her shift had only begun at noon. The diner was called Joe's, which was probably not the owner's actual name. The floors were checkered black and white, the same pattern as her uniform. The smell of grease hung in the air like a living thing. Table 6 needs water, barked Roger, the manager, without looking at her. And smile when you do it. You look like someone killed your dog. She did not smile. Her face was not her own anymore. It had become a mask she wore to survive. She had learned that this worked better than attempting genuine warmth. Men responded to the mask without trying to look behind it. The coffee she poured was bitter and old. It had been sitting in the pot since breakfast. The couple at table 6 did not care. They did not even look at her as she refilled their cups. She was wallpaper. She was the hum of the refrigerator. She was nothing. At 3 o'clock, her phone vibrated in her pocket. She had precisely 6 seconds before Roger would notice her checking it. She ducked into the bathroom and looked at the message. Mercy General Hospital. Room for 47. AB negative blood donation needed. $200 compensation. Her hands trembled. $200 was not enough. She had been running numbers in her head all week, a calculation that never changed no matter how many times she did it. She needed $85,000 in 48 hours. Douglas Hale had been very clear about that. Very specific. He had given her 3 days from last Friday, which meant she had already used one. 48 hours remained. 48 hours until he came to her apartment and took Emma, until her 7-year-old sister became another inventory item in his network of transportation and housing that was actually human trafficking wrapped in bureaucratic language. She had $78 in her bank account. Not $78,000. Not even close. $88 and some change. But $200 was 2 weeks of groceries. $200 meant Emma could skip the cheap generic asthma inhaler and get the name brand one that actually worked. $200 meant she could buy the child shoes that did not have holes worn through the soles. She texted back, yes. When? The response came immediately, before 7 p.m. today. Bring ID. Bring proof of address. Aria stared at the screen. The apartment address on her ID was 3 months out of date. She lived in Koreatown now, in a one-room place so small that Emma's sleeping mat took up most of the floor space. The landlord, a man named Harold Brennan who owned half the buildings in the neighborhood and all of the debt that went with them, kept the rent payment cash only. No lease. No paperwork. No paper trail for anyone looking. She clocked out at 3:15, which meant she lost the rest of her shift and the tips she might have made, but the hospital was 20 minutes away if she took the bus. The November afternoon was warm, unusual for this late in the year. The air felt thin, unstable, like it might break apart at any moment. The bus smelled like diesel fuel and other people's resignation. Aria sat by the window and did not think about anything. Thinking required energy she did not have. She had learned to exist in a kind of void, awake but not present, breathing but not alive, here but not really anywhere at all. Mercy General's blood bank was in the basement. The technician, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes and a name tag that said Brenda, barely glanced at her before taking the ID and checking the address against a database. This address is expired, Brenda said. Not unkind, just stating a fact. I just moved. I can give you the new one. Aria pulled out her phone to find the address on her rental agreement, the handwritten one Harold Brennan had given her when she paid the first month in cash. Brenda typed it in. Okay. You're good. You've never donated before. No. It might make you feel lightheaded. That's normal. We'll have you lie down for about 20 minutes after, give you some juice and cookies. You're a universal donor, AB negative. There are people out there right now who need this, who are waiting, who might not make it through the night without people like you willing to give. Brenda smiled, and it was real, and it made Aria's chest hurt because no one had spoken to her that way in so long, not like she was doing something good, not like her body held value beyond what someone like Douglas Hale could extract from it. The needle went in. The blood flowed out, a dark red river drawn from somewhere deep inside her that she had thought was empty. She watched it travel through the tube into the bag, and she thought about all the people she was never going to meet, all the bodies that would run on what she was giving up, all the invisible people saving each other in the dark. The technician squeezed her forearm gently. You're doing great. Almost done. When it was finished, Brenda brought her to a recovery area and handed her a juice box and a packet of crackers. Sip slowly. Eat the whole thing. You'll feel better in a few minutes. Aria sipped the juice. It tasted like childhood, like the few months before everything broke. Emma had been just born then. There had been a moment, she could still feel it if she let herself, which she rarely did, when the baby had looked directly at her and smiled, a completely instinctive smile, recognition of safety. Where had that safety gone? Where had that world disappeared to? You okay? Brenda asked. Aria nodded. She could not afford to be not okay. Not okay was a luxury item, reserved for people who had other people to catch them when they fell. At the hospital's front desk, they handed her an envelope. $200 in cash. Exactly as promised. She held it in both hands like it might disintegrate. The bus ride home was different on the return journey. The money in her pocket felt like a secret. Like a small rebellion. Like the first moment of power she had held in years. Emma was at the neighbor's apartment, a woman named Yuki who kept her on the days when Aria worked double shifts. The child was sitting on Yuki's kitchen floor playing with blocks, stacking them carefully, her small face set in concentration. When she looked up and saw Aria, her entire face transformed. Nuna! She used the Korean word for older sister, though Emma's Korean was crumbling from disuse, the English gradually replacing it as she grew older in this country. I made a tower. Aria crouched down and held her sister, breathing in the smell of her hair, the simple childhood scent of her. Emma was 7 and already so careful. Already so aware that some things could be taken. Already so ready to love Aria completely, without reservation, without the armor that Aria had learned to wear. Thank you, Yuki, Aria said. Is okay. Emma is good girl. Very quiet. Yuki said this kindly, but the implication was there. Quiet children were easier. Quiet children did not demand anything. That night, in the one-room apartment in Koreatown, Aria lay on her mat beside Emma's smaller sleeping pad. Through the window, she could hear the city, car horns, distant music, the general hum of millions of people trying to survive together. She had $278 now. She needed $84,722 more. The deadline was 36 hours away. She closed her eyes and tried not to think about Douglas Hale's voice on the phone, the way it never changed, never wavered, never suggested that he understood refusal as anything other than a personal insult. He had been clear from the moment he found her 2 years ago, she owed him a debt. The debt was payable in money or in service, and he preferred service because service was infinite. Service never ran out. She had run before. She and Emma had gotten on a bus with nothing but the clothes they were wearing and a pair of small children's shoes she had saved from a shelter, the kind of shoes that meant Emma had been loved by someone before Aria found her again. She had thought that distance could save them. But Douglas Hale had found her anyway. He always found people like her, invisible women with nowhere to go and no one to call. He had simply walked into the diner where she was working and sat down in booth 7, and he had smiled, and he had explained in his soft, reasonable voice that the debt came with interest, and that the interest was significant, and that certain arrangements needed to be made. Outside the window, the November wind was rising. It moved through the city like something alive, something searching. Somewhere in a hospital room, someone was receiving blood. Somewhere, someone's heart was being saved because she had let someone put a needle in her vein. She had no idea that in 4 months, exactly 4 months to this week, she would be in another room with a man whose sheet she cleaned, and everything would change, and the invisible thing she had given away would come back to her transformed into something that looked almost like love. But that was still future. That was still locked inside a moment that had not yet revealed itself. For now, there was only the sound of Emma's breathing and the rising wind and the ticking clock that promised, within 36 hours, to destroy everything she had fought so hard to protect. The needle slid into her vein like a blade through silk, and Aria Reynolds watched her own blood drop into the collection bag, crimson against clear plastic, her life force measured in milliliters and ounces. The nurse beside her was kind, with crow's feet around her eyes and a name tag that read Patricia, and Patricia kept saying, "You're doing great, honey, almost there," but Aria was not thinking about the needle or the blood or Patricia's kindness. She was thinking about Emma's breathing at 3 in the morning, the wheeze that meant the inhaler was empty, the inhalers that cost $47 every time they ran out, and she had run out 3 times this year. The hospital room was fluorescent white, the kind of white that made everything look like it was drowning. July heat pressed against the windows from outside, but in here the air conditioning made her shiver. Aria's arms were thin, almost translucent in the harsh light, the veins visible like roads on a map, roads that led nowhere except to this chair and this needle and this $200 that would buy groceries and Emma's breathing and 1 more week of time before the deadline. 3 days left. 72 hours. Douglas Hale's voice still echoed in her skull from that morning, soft and reasonable like a man discussing the weather. Friday, Aria. $85,000 by Friday or the little one becomes inventory. The blood filled the bag. Patricia made a note on her chart. The patient in room for 47 is lucky, Patricia said, and Aria almost asked who room for 47 was, but she didn't. She never asked about the people her blood went to. It was easier not to know. It was easier to pretend she was not feeding her own life into the bodies of strangers to keep Emma alive. When the needle came out, there was a small circle of cotton taped to her inner elbow, and Patricia handed her a juice box and 3 saltine crackers and explained that Aria needed to sit for 10 minutes, hydrate, eat something, let her blood pressure stabilize. Aria held the juice box, a small thing, a child's thing, tropical punch, the kind Emma liked, and she thought about how $200 was not $85,000 and how even if she donated blood every week for the next 2 years, even if she gave every drop she had, she would never close that gap. The debt was infinite. The debt had teeth. She sat in the donation chair for exactly 10 minutes, watching the clock on the wall tick forward. Her ribs ached. 3 days ago, Douglas Hale had grabbed her by the collar and shoved her against the kitchen wall when she asked for an extension, and she heard something crack, felt something shift inside her chest, but she did not go to the hospital because the hospital asks questions and she had no answers they could accept. Aria stood up slowly. The room tilted slightly, then settled. She folded the juice box into her pocket, pocketed the saltine crackers, and made her way down the corridor of Mercy General Hospital toward the exit. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead like dying insects. A machine beeped somewhere. A woman cried behind a closed door. All of this was real, all of this was happening in the same moment that her blood was being rushed to room for 47, to someone whose heart was beating because of what was leaving her body. She walked out into the July afternoon and the sky was the color of a bruise, heavy and swollen with rain that hadn't fallen yet. Her car was a 1998 Honda Civic with a cracked windshield and bald tires, the kind of car that coughed and sputtered and reminded her daily that it was dying in installments. She unlocked it with a key that stuck sometimes, and sat in the driver's seat breathing the stale air and rust smell of the interior. The $200 in her pocket felt simultaneously like everything and like nothing. She turned the key. The engine caught. She pulled out of the hospital parking lot and headed north on the 101 toward Bel Air, toward the mansion where she cleaned, where she changed sheets twice a week and emptied trash cans and tried to make herself small enough that the men who lived there would forget she existed. The traffic was thick and moving slowly, and Aria sat in the slow river of cars, her hands at 10 and 2 on the steering wheel, her eyes on the road. She was thinking about Emma, about the way her daughter's breathing sounded in the dark, about the moment Douglas Hale walked into the diner 6 months ago and sat in booth 7 and explained, in his soft, reasonable voice, about interest and arrangements and the fact that Emma was very young and very valuable. Then the car began to sputter. Then the car began to die. First the acceleration faltered. Then the engine hiccuped. Aria steered toward the shoulder as the RPMs dropped and the car lost power, coasting across 2 lanes like a wounded animal, finally coming to rest on the far right side of the 101, where the guardrail stood between her and a steep drop. She tried the ignition. Nothing. She tried again. Nothing but a grinding sound, a mechanical scream, the sound of a machine reaching the end of what it could give. Aria sat in the silence. The car ticked as it cooled. Outside the windows, the sky was darkening, the bruise-colored clouds moving lower, and the November wind, no, July wind, she corrected herself, it was July, not November, she was confused from the blood loss and the hunger and the fear, the wind picked up and began to move through the canyon of cars like something alive. She had no cell phone signal. She had no money for a tow truck. She had $200 in her pocket and a shift that started in 45 minutes, and if she didn't show up for that shift, she lost that day's wages, and if she lost that day's wages, she had even less money for the impossible debt. Aria stepped out of the car into the wind. The first drops of rain came like a warning. The sky opened, and suddenly the world was water, the 101 obscured by a wall of gray, visibility dropping to almost nothing, headlights clicking on across all lanes. Lightning cracked overhead, a sound like the sky breaking open. She stood in the rain trying to figure out what to do, and that was when she saw the headlights. 3 black SUVs emerged from the downpour like sharks through bloody water, moving slowly, deliberately, the lead vehicle slowing as it passed her car. Aria's entire body went rigid. She had seen men like the ones who would emerge from those vehicles. She had learned, over 2 years, to read danger the way other people read weather. the lead SUV pulled onto the shoulder ahead of her stalled car. Two men stepped out, their dark suits immediately soaked, their hands at their sides in the way that suggested there were weapons if the conversation required weapons. They walked toward her with the casual confidence of men who had never been told no in their entire lives. Marco reached her first. He was broad-shouldered, with a jaw like granite and eyes that looked at her the way a butcher looks at meat. Pietro was taller, leaner, with a scar along his left cheekbone that suggested a story Aria did not want to hear. "The car is dead," Aria said, her voice shaking. "I just need to get to Bel Air. I have a shift." Marco's eyes narrowed. He reached toward her face, and Aria flinched, but he was only lifting her chin, examining her in the rain. Her left eye was swollen shut, bruises still fresh and purple from where Douglas Hale's fingers had dug into her face. Blood was mixing with the rain on her split lip. "Jesus," Marco said quietly. He looked at Pietro. "That's the maid. From the house." Pietro was already on his radio. Static answered him, then a voice, deep and solid like an oath. "Sir, we have a situation." Woman on the shoulder. "She is hurt." A pause. Then, "Which woman?" "The one from the bedroom, sir. The one who cleans." Another pause, longer this time. Then, "Bring her." Aria tried to step backward, but Marco was already moving, his hand gentle against her elbow. "Come on," he said. "We're taking you to him." I can't," Aria began, but her knees buckled then, the blood loss and hunger and fear finally catching up with her, and she felt herself falling forward, felt Marco's strong arms catch her, felt the world narrowing to a single point of darkness. The last thing she heard was the sound of rain on the roof of the SUV as she was lifted inside. Then nothing. She woke in a bed that felt like clouds. The sheets were cotton, Egyptian cotton, the kind that cost more than a month of her rent. The room was enormous, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, and the city was sprawling below her like a kingdom of lights. She was wearing a white linen nightshirt that was not hers, and her ribs were wrapped in bandages, and there was a man sitting in a chair beside the bed. He was older than she expected, perhaps early 40s, with dark hair silvered at the temples and a scar running from the corner of his left eye to his cheekbone like a second smile. His shirt was black and open at the collar, and beneath it she could see the edge of white bandaging, as if he too had been hurt recently, as if he too had been broken. "You are awake," he said. His voice was low and careful, as if he was testing each word before releasing it. "I am Aleandro Valenti. You are in my home. You are safe." Aria tried to sit up, but pain cut through her ribs like a blade, and she gasped, and he stood immediately, pressing her gently back into the pillows. "Do not move," he said. "Dr. Ricky says you have 3 cracked ribs and a concussion. You also have severe contusions and lacerations on your throat and face. You have been sleeping for 6 hours." "I have to," Aria began, but Aleandro raised one hand, and she fell silent. In that gesture was the weight of 1,000 decisions, the authority of a man who was not accustomed to being interrupted. "Who did this to you?" he asked. Aria did not answer. "Who did this?" he asked again, his voice exactly the same, but something in his eyes had changed, something cold and dangerous was moving behind his pupils like a shark in dark water. "It does not matter," Aria whispered. "I just need to get home." "Emma. Emma is your daughter." She nodded. "She is being cared for," Aleandro said. "My men brought her here. She is in the guest room on this floor. She is safe. She is sleeping." Aria felt something break open inside her chest, something that had been sealed shut for 2 years, and tears came, hot and terrible, and she could not stop them because for the first time since Douglas Hale found her, someone had said the word she needed to hear: "Emma is safe." Aleandro waited while she cried. He did not comfort her. He simply waited, his dark eyes watching her with an intensity that suggested he was reading something in her tears, something written in a language only he understood. When she could speak again, Aria asked, "Why would you help me? I am nobody. I clean your floors." He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his scarred face very close to hers. "You saved my life," he said. She blinked at him, confused. He continued, 3 weeks ago, I was shot. I required a rare blood type, AB negative. I was in critical condition in Mercy General Hospital, room for 47. A maid donated blood that morning. You donated blood that morning. Your name is on the hospital record. Aria Reynolds. AB negative. You gave me your blood when I was dying, and now, I will give you everything you need. Aria stared at him. She thought of the needle, the blood, the $200, the patient in room for 47 whose face she would never know. She thought of the strange, circular symmetry of it, the way the universe sometimes works in patterns too perfect to be accident. We need to find your sister, Aleandro said. And we need to find the man who did this to you. His name is Douglas Hale, Aria said, and as she spoke his name, somewhere in a warehouse in Vernon, a man with slicked back hair and a gold watch was making phone calls. Emma's inhaler slipped from Aria's hand and clattered against the marble floor of La Stella Nera. The sound echoed through the restaurant like a gunshot in silence. The child's small body convulsed in the candlelit booth, her lips turning the color of old bruises, her chest heaving as if the air itself had become poison. Aleandro Valenti, a man who had built an empire on violence and absolute control, dropped to his knees beside the table. His hands trembled. His voice broke like glass. Someone get help. Now. But no one moved. Marco and Pietro stood frozen, their eyes wide with something they had never witnessed in 15 years of loyal service, their boss, kneeling, helpless, his power meaningless against a child's collapse. The restaurant manager fumbled for a phone. A waiter panicked. And Aria moved. She was already reaching into her purse, her fingers finding the inhaler with the certainty of someone who had done this 1,000 times before. She pressed the device into Emma's mouth, depressed the medication button, and held the child's head steady while the medicine entered her lungs. 1 breath. 2. 3. Emma's eyes fluttered open, her color slowly returning from death gray to something approaching human. Aleandro watched her save his life while his empire crumbled into absolute uselessness beside them, and something in his chest shifted like the tectonic plates of the world realigning. The doctors arrived. Emma was rushed to Mercy General, where she was admitted for observation, where her asthma was pronounced manageable, where she slept with Aria's hand holding hers through the night. Aleandro paced the hospital corridor at 2:36 in the morning, his tailored suit wrinkled, his scarred face bearing the weight of a man who had just learned that the things money could not buy were the things that mattered most. Aria did not sleep. She sat in the guest room of the penthouse at 3:16 a.m., her hands shaking as she pulled out a piece of paper and began to write. The pen moved across the page like a knife cutting through her own heart. Aleandro, you saved me when no one else would. You protected Emma when I had nothing left to give. But I cannot stay. Douglas Hale will never stop hunting me, and Cordelia Blackwood has resources I cannot fight. If I stay, I will bring danger to you and to Emma. I cannot let that happen. I am leaving tonight. I will disappear where they cannot find me. Emma will stay with you. Please keep her safe. Please tell her I loved her more than anything. And thank you. For seeing me when I was invisible. For giving me hope when I had none. Aria. She folded the letter with trembling fingers and placed it on the pillow. She packed a small bag, just clothes, the $278 she had left, and the child's first pair of shoes she kept since the shelter, worn canvas with tiny laces, proof that Emma had once been small enough to hold in her palms. She took the service elevator to the roof of the penthouse building. The city sprawled beneath her like a sea of broken lights, stretching toward an ocean she could not see in the darkness. The wind was cold. She gripped the railing and thought of the night she had spent wondering if disappearing would be easier than fighting. She thought of Douglas Hale's voice, dripping like venom through the phone, and his threat that echoed in her nightmares, the money or the girl. You have 3 days, Aria. After that, I come for her myself. She thought of Cordelia Blackwood's manicured hands and predatory smile, the wealthy society woman who had provided the safe houses where girls like Aria were delivered like packages to the highest bidder. She pulled out her phone. Her finger hovered over the screen. Then she heard it, the soft hiss of an inhaler, the sound of medicine being released into the night air, the familiar rhythm of Emma's breathing treatment. The child had left the inhaler on the nightstand. Emma might need it before morning. One small thing stopped her. One tiny reason to turn around and walk back inside. She turned back toward the door. Aleandro found the letter at 3:15 a.m. He read it once. Twice. His jaw clenched so tightly that the scar running from his eye to his cheekbone seemed to deepen with shadow. He told Marco, his voice low and solid like an oath, "Find her. Now." They found her in the hallway, walking back toward Emma's room with the inhaler held like a lifeline. Aleandro stopped her. His dark eyes burned into hers. "You were going to leave," he said. It was not a question. Aria nodded, tears streaming down her face like a river that could not be dammed. "You do not get to decide that," Aleandro said, stepping closer. "You do not get to walk away because you think you are not worth saving. You saved my life. Twice. Once with your blood when I was dying in a hospital bed you will never remember cleaning. Once with your hands when my empire meant nothing against a child's collapse." "I am nobody," she whispered. "You are the woman who gave me my life," he said. "That makes you everything." He told her what he had done. For 7 days, while she had held Emma's hand and watched her sleep, while she had counted the hours until she would disappear, Aleandro had gathered evidence. His investigators had mapped every transaction, every property, every victim. Douglas Hale's operation in Vernon. Cordelia Blackwood's network of wealthy clients and corrupted officials. Their names. Their locations. Their crimes, documented with the meticulous precision of a man who understood that justice required proof, not mercy. "I have given it all to the FBI," Aleandro said. "Tonight, they strike." The first raid happened at 5:36 in the morning, when the summer sun was still an hour away from breaking through the darkness. 12 FBI agents in tactical gear surrounded Douglas Hale's warehouse in Vernon, their vehicles moving with the silence of predators. Aleandro's men, Marco, Pietro, and 10 others, positioned themselves in the shadows, ensuring no one escaped. The warehouse door exploded inward. Douglas Hale was dragged from his office in a suit that cost more than Aria had earned in her entire life, his slick-back hair disheveled, his face pale and slick with the sweat of a man watching his empire collapse. He dropped to his knees on the concrete floor, trembling like a wounded animal caught in a trap. His voice cracked as he begged for mercy, for understanding, for something to hold on to. An FBI agent read his rights with the mechanical precision of someone who had done this 1,000 times before. Conspiracy to commit human trafficking. Kidnapping. Extortion. Federal charges. 40 years minimum. No parole. They threw him into the back of a black van. Within 1 hour, his face appeared on every news channel in Los Angeles, his expression broken, his power evaporated like morning fog. By 7:44 a.m., 50 million people had seen his handcuffed walk. By noon, 200 million. At 6:15 a.m., federal agents arrived at Cordelia Blackwood's Pasadena estate, a mansion built on stolen lives and corrupted souls. She answered the door in a silk robe, a cup of tea balanced in her perfectly manicured hand, her expression composed like a woman who believed the rules of society existed to protect people like her. When she saw the FBI badges, her face crumbled like ancient paper. She screamed, her voice sharp as broken glass, "Do you know who I am?" "Yes," the agent said. "You are under arrest for racketeering, conspiracy to commit human trafficking, and money laundering." Her assets were frozen before her handcuffs were fastened. Her properties were seized by the federal government. Her name was dragged through every newspaper, every broadcast, every corner of the internet, transformed from a society fixture into a cautionary tale. Her neighbors watched from their lawns as she was led to the government vehicle, her silk robe fluttering in the morning breeze, her face finally bearing the weight of what she had done. Federal prison. 40 years. No parole. No mercy. Justice is not always swift. It is not always violent. Sometimes it is systematic, methodical, absolute, a slow dismantling of everything built on the suffering of others, piece by piece, until nothing remains but the hollow shell of what they used to be. By dawn, both villains were in custody. By sunset, their empires were ashes. By the end of the week, their names had become synonymous with the darkness they had created, and the young women they had trafficked began to emerge from the shadows, finding their voices again, finding their lives again, finding themselves again. Aria stood at the window of the penthouse and watched the city transform from a place of danger into a place of possibility. Behind her, Aleandro waited. In the guest room down the hall, Emma slept peacefully, her breathing steady, her future secured, her mother, because that is what Aria had become, what she would always be, finally safe to love her without fear. The storm had passed. And Aria Reynolds, who had once been invisible, discovered that she was not nobody. She was the woman who had saved a life. She was the woman who had been brave when bravery meant walking back inside instead of disappearing into the night. She was stronger than she had ever imagined, and the sky had finally cleared. 2 weeks had passed since the federal agents led Douglas Hale and Cordelia Blackwood away in handcuffs, their faces pressed against the windows of black government vehicles as cameras flashed like lightning across every news channel in Los Angeles. The penthouse felt different now. The fortress had become a home. Sunlight poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows, warming the marble floors that Aria had once cleaned on her hands and knees, invisible in her black and white uniform. Now she walked across them barefoot, a cup of coffee cooling in her hands, and nobody told her to move faster or work harder or keep her head down. Emma ran through the living room, her small frame moving with a freedom that had not existed before, her stuffed rabbit trailing behind her like a forgotten memory. The child's laughter, bright, unburdened, alive, echoed off the glass walls. Her inhaler sat on the side table, still within reach, but she had not needed it in days. The air was clean here. The air was safe. Aria watched from the threshold between the kitchen and living room, still learning how to exist in spaces like this without guilt, without the constant weight of waiting to be sent back to the shadows. Her bruises had faded to yellow and green, the handprints on her throat reduced to faint marks, the swelling around her left eye nearly gone. She could look in the mirror now without flinching. The elevator chimed softly, a sound like a bell announcing a visitor, though no one ever visited. But Aleandro emerged, his suit dark and expensive, his jaw tight with the weight of information. Marco followed 3 steps behind, and the lieutenant's eyes found Aria's for just a moment before looking away. In that glance, she saw something shift. Recognition. An acknowledgement that things had changed in ways that could not be undone. "The case is closed," Aleandro said. His voice came out steady, like a verdict being read in a courtroom. "Hale and Cordelia will never see daylight again. 40 years each. No parole." Emma stopped running. She turned and looked at the adults with the clarity that only children possess. But Aria did not move. She stood in the kitchen threshold, the coffee cup still in her hands, steam rising like a question mark. "There is more," Aleandro continued. "The FBI identified 19 other victims. 19 women who have been found, rescued, returned to their families or to safe houses. Cordelia's network of wealthy clients was dismantled. 19 families know their daughters are coming home." The words landed like stones dropped into still water, and Aria felt something break open in her chest. 19. The number repeated in her mind. 19 was an entire world. 19 was proof that the violence had not been meaningless, that the choice to fight had consequences beyond her own survival. She set the coffee cup on the counter. Her hands were shaking. "What happens to us now?" The question came out small, fragile as glass, as if she already knew the answer would be that this moment was temporary, a reprieve before the real world pulled her back into its jaws. Aleandro stepped closer. He did not touch her. "Not yet. That is your choice," he said. What happens now is entirely your choice. I do not understand, Aria whispered. You do not have to stay, Aleandro said. You do not have to be part of this. You do not have to be part of me. The penthouse is yours, or I can set you up elsewhere. Education, a career, whatever you need. You owe me nothing. Aria turned away from him, her eyes following Emma as the child picked up her stuffed rabbit and held it against her chest. The rabbit was grey, worn at the seams, its button eyes nearly falling off. Emma had named it Grey, and she carried it everywhere like it was the most precious thing in the world. I do not know how to be anything other than invisible, Aria said, her voice barely audible above the ambient hum of the city outside the windows. I have spent my whole life keeping my head down, working in silence, surviving. That is all I know how to do. Aleandro moved to stand beside her, and his presence was like a change in atmospheric pressure. You do not have to be invisible anymore, he said. Not to me. Not to Emma. Not to yourself. She turned to face him, and her eyes were red-rimmed but dry. She had learned long ago not to cry where people could see. Why? Why would you want me here? I am nobody. Douglas told me that 1,000 times. I am broken and defective and worth less than the cost of keeping me alive. Aleandro's jaw tightened at the sound of Hale's words coming from her mouth. Because when Emma stopped breathing, you acted while everyone else froze, he said. Because you gave me your blood when I was dying and you did not even know my name. Because I have spent 15 years building an empire, and in one moment watching you refuse to abandon a child, I realized that everything I have built is dust compared to the strength you carry inside you. You are not nobody. You are the opposite of nobody. You are the kind of person who saves lives while risking your own. I do not know how to trust that this is real, Aria said. I do not know how to believe that someone like you would want someone like me. Neither do I, Aleandro replied. Something broke in his voice then, a crack that revealed the depth beneath the surface. I have spent my whole life making certain choices. Survival. Loyalty. Vengeance. I had a brother once. Luca. He was supposed to inherit everything I built, but he chose to betray me instead. He chose money over blood. When I realized what he had done, I had to choose between mercy and survival. I chose survival. I made that choice 100 times over, and each time I told myself it was necessary, that sentiment would destroy me, that love was a weakness I could not afford. He paused, and the silence in the penthouse stretched like a held breath. But when I saw you on the side of that highway, broken and bleeding in the rain, something changed inside me, Aleandro continued. I realized I am tired of only surviving. I want something more. I want to know what it feels like to build something that is not based on fear or control, but on the choice to protect someone because they matter. Because their life matters. Because their happiness matters. Aria reached across the space between them and took his hand. His palm was warm, his grip careful, as if he was afraid she might shatter under too much pressure. Then we build something more, she said. Emma suddenly ran toward them both, her small body moving with the unself-consciousness of childhood. She held up a piece of paper covered in crayon marks, 3 stick figures with circle heads and straight-line bodies, standing in front of a rectangle that was clearly meant to be a house. Above them, in letters she had carefully traced from the alphabet magnets on the refrigerator, were 3 words, U.S. Family. This is us, Emma said, her voice clear and certain. We are a family now. I drought it. Aleandro crouched down to Emma's level, and Aria watched as this man, this powerful man whose name was whispered with fear in the streets of Los Angeles, became something else entirely. He became small. He became human. He became someone capable of tenderness. Yes, Aleandro said, looking at the drawing with the gravity of a museum curator studying a priceless painting. We are a family. And this drawing is the most important thing in this entire penthouse. He carefully took it from Emma's hands and walked to the refrigerator, where he attached it with a magnet at eye level, not pushed to the corner, not hidden away, but centered, prominent, impossible to miss. Aria felt something shift inside her chest, something that had been broken for so long she had forgotten it could mend. She looked at Emma, at the child's face full of certainty and hope, and then at Aleandro, who was studying the drawing like it was the architectural blueprint for his entire future. The sun was beginning its descent toward the Pacific when Aria found herself on the penthouse balcony, the wind moving through her hair, the city sprawling below like a circuit board of lights and possibility. Aleandro joined her, and they stood in the kind of silence that requires no explanation, no justification, no words at all. The kind of silence that says, I see you, and I choose you, and that choice is enough. I used to think I had to be invisible to survive, Aria said, her voice barely above a whisper. That if I kept my head down and worked hard enough and asked for nothing, maybe one day I would be safe. But safety is not the same as living. Safety is just waiting for the next blow. Safety is holding your breath until you forget how to breathe. You were never invisible, Aleandro said. Not to me. I know that now, Aria replied, and she smiled, a real smile, not the defensive expression she had perfected over years of service, but something genuine and unguarded. I know that now. Emma burst through the glass door, her small frame silhouetted against the golden light of the setting sun. She ran between them, and Aleandro lifted her into his arms while Aria wrapped her own arms around them both, and the three of them stood together as the city transformed from day into night, as the sky shifted from gold to purple to deep blue, as 1,000 windows in 1,000 buildings lit up like stars. The storm had passed. Aria Reynolds, who had once been invisible, discovered that she was not nobody. She was the woman who saved a life. She was the woman who was brave enough to let someone see her. She was stronger than she had ever imagined, and the sky had finally cleared. If this story reminded you that you are stronger than you think, drop a like and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe for more stories that will leave you thinking long after the screen goes dark. And remember, the storm will pass, and you are far stronger than you think. See you in the next one.